What's up, everybody? It's Greg Birch with Delta Financial, and this is the Be the Difference podcast. This podcast is all about making you a better person in your life and in your business with coaching on sales, leadership, mindset, marketing, everything under the sun when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And we bring on guest speakers. Today, I've got the honor and pleasure of welcoming Miss Paula Conroy to the show. Paula, how are you?
Greg. Yeah, so good. Really nice to connect with you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to hear more about your story and your experiences and see what all you got to share with all the audience today. And for those of you that don't know Paula, Paula is a transformational leader who supports women to transition from one stage of life to the next in a really healthy way. She uses the ancient wisdom inherent in traditional rites of passage processes to bring awareness to the elements that are required to ensure that these inevitable transitions in life are done well. Paula's main focus is to support women to become aware of the fragmented and suppressed parts of themselves that are showing up in unhealthy ways in their lives and leadership styles, and how to bring these parts into balance to lead with more clarity, less reactivity, and a greater degree of alignment with their core values. To recognize how to self-source to heal these aspects of self, therefore discovering the possibility of moving powerfully into the next stage of maturity and into their full potency of womanhood. Paula spent 15 years in senior leadership positions with global banking, managing large, complex, multi-jurisdictional teams. She recognizes the criticality of conscious leadership of self as an essential capacity to cultivate prior to taking on the responsibility to lead others. Feminine leadership capacities have been buried under the current culture and ways of training, and Paula is stewarding women through transformational journeys to discover this for themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Paula. I love this. This is great. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. Let's jump right in. Let's get dirty. Let's do this.
Beautiful. I'm ready.
So Paula, tell us, you had 15 years of leadership position and experience. I assume this is that's kind of the start or the beginning of your journey. Talk to us about your journey of how, because almost always, right? We had to go through it first, which was this transformational experience. We're like, man, we got to share this with other people, right? Talk to us about your journey and how you had to learn these healthy ways to transition to different areas of your life.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks so much, Greg. Yes, so 15 years in corporate institutional banking, which was an extraordinary experience. And in those younger years of my life where I was journeying through various roles within a global bank, mostly on the customer-facing side, spent 7 or 8 years in the sales role, dealing with really sort of high net worth corporate and institutional clients, mostly focusing on the global liquidity side of their cash management and the way in which they manage short-term investments and the complexity of how the cash moved around the world. So really interesting clients. And for those younger years of my career, that particular rite of passage of that transition from sort of school and university into the workplace was a really exciting sort of up and out phase of my journey, which when mirrored against that journey of consciousness development within a human being, and specifically within the feminine consciousness journey as we become more aware as we grow older, that up and out experience was a very fruitful, very exciting, very stretching time of my life. And so I have great fond memories of all that I gained through that experience and all that I gained through not just working on the client side and dealing with a number of different sort of treasuries and so on around the world and large sums of money, but then from sales transitioning into a country head role, looking after the client management team within my division. So I had sort of 40 odd people that reported into me under my team, as well as an offshore team that had a dotted reporting line into me. And we looked after these high net worth clients across the whole of Australia that also then had business with the bank in other parts of the world. So from an experience point of view, I gathered so much from that day-to-day interaction with not just my team members, but also with the nature of the way in which the global banking system works. So much was gleaned from that. But however, as we grow, things start to change. And I started to notice this internal experience that I was having of what felt like a misalignment to my own self. There was this outward persona and this outward experience that I was having, not just with my teams and my clients, but also then this misalignment that I had with my family. I had small children that were growing, and I was working long, strong hours in the bank, and very, very much committed to my teams and to the clients that I served. But at the same time, noticing that there was this internal feeling of what one could call aridity and death. And there are these two very specific rites of passage theories. One is written by Joseph Campbell, which is called the hero's journey, which is that experience of all of us going through what's a more masculine process within both men and women of seeking up and out, and that call to adventure, that call to stretch ourselves out of our current lives and into something new. This call to explore where life is calling us to. However, that masculine journey of the hero's journey does eventually cross over with what's called the heroine's journey, which was coined by an amazing writer, author, and thinker called Maureen Murdoch. And she coined this heroine's journey as not this seeking up and out, but rather this recognition that there's this in and down process that calls us. And I think this may be mirrored in many people experiencing what might be called a midlife crisis, as they get to a certain point in their life where the boon of success of their life is not necessarily attuned to what's happening within them as an individual, or within them in alignment with the life that they're living any longer. That process seems to have come to a conclusion, and we're getting called to this inward process, this inward seeking and searching. Why do I feel so misaligned, discombobulated, unhappy, potentially frustrated? Bad behaviors might be coming out with family members, with team members, maybe perhaps apathy within my work, a lack of drive, confusion over why I'm not driven anymore. And all of that was going on for me. Why am I no longer in this sort of up and out phase of my journey where I've got so much available to me? I've got this extraordinary team. I've got these amazing clients. I've got a beautiful career path that is kind of paved for me as a female in banking, as a senior female leader within banking. That's a very sort of powerful place to be as a woman, if that's where one finds oneself. And certainly for me, I had a real grapple with that experience of, wow, I've got this extraordinary opportunity. And by all intents and purposes, this, from an external perspective, wow, she's got it all. She's got this great job. She's got prospects. She's got a career path. She's got a family, and everything seemingly looks like it's working so well. And yet inside, there's this experience that I was having of misalignment and what could be called that feeling of aridity, that feeling of disenfranchisement. And so there was a period of time where I had to go about dismantling these fragmented parts and really become aware of where I was clinging to this old structure, or this paradigm that I'd got quite attached to, that my ego was quite identified with, my personality was identified with, 15 years of experience and all of that value and worth that was within me from an equity perspective. What do I do with all of this 15 years of experience? Do I just walk away from that? Like, wow, it was a really big journey for me to go through a process of bit by bit being able to untangle all of those attachments that I had to that personality and that persona, and to be able to let all of that go and almost have a death of that identity and allow for that to die in service of what needed to be born in this internal process to emerge from within me, and to be able to come to the forefront and be able to now be striving, or not striving, that's the wrong word, be progressing forward on my journey in a place within me that feels much more aligned to the balance and harmony that I want to feel in my day-to-day life, the peace that I want to feel in the way in which I run my life, and the harmony that I have in the time that I get with my family, the time that I get with my children, and also in that creation of the new through my business, The Frequency, to be able to offer in service, as you quite rightly pointed out, the elixir or the gifts of that very difficult dissolve, or that very difficult death of that old identity, to allow myself to emerge now into this new place where I feel that I am aligned to the internal structure of my value system. And I am here now to give in service something that is coming through me and from me, and not necessarily taking from me. which is where I kind of got to in that old life. And so that rite of passage, that transition from the one stage of life to the next, is an incredibly potent process to be able to go through if we are gifted with the awareness of what a healthy rite of passage looks like. Because
Yeah.
lots of people feel that aridity in their lives, and they land up in a situation where they do land up having a nervous breakdown, or they land up, just completely bowing out and becoming anxious or depressed or whatever might happen, because they don't necessarily have the tools or the community or the know-how, the awareness to be able to recognize that they're being called to a transition, and that call to the transition, although it's always going to inherently involve a challenge, ultimately that challenge will invariably allow for that transition to happen in a very healthy way, to align oneself with a new vision for oneself and how one wishes to go forward. But it's that transition process that we don't do so well in our culture today. We don't necessarily have the community and the structure to support people. And so, having now gone through that myself, I feel like I've got the elixir of how to do those transitions well, that I've now birthed into my business called The Frequency, which is to support women to do the same. Yeah.
It sounds like that's a very difficult transition to kind of embark upon. Even you referenced it as like almost the death of that old self.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume, how, in fact, talk a little bit about the challenge that you had with letting go of that older version and embracing and accepting that journey to become the new version that you are today.
Yeah, beautiful. So, the thing that a lot of us grapple with is there's the personal experience, but then there's also this culturally determined experience that we live within. So, we are all born into a certain life, and we all grow up in a certain way, and we have culture dictating to us all the time, sort of imprinting its programming into us. Of, you've got to go to school, and then go to university, and then, get your first job, and then get your first mortgage, and get your first house, and, get the, 2.5 kids and the partner, and whatever it might be, as culture's kind of programming us from a very early age around creating a certain lifestyle. And as we do that, we don't necessarily realize at the time that culture is actually holding us beholden to some kind of in a way, modern day slavery, that we are, that what we get revered for in that journey of creating the culturally approved lifestyle actually in turn can result in us feeling very trapped in our existence, because we don't necessarily have that opportunity to allow for that unique essence and our unique gifts and talents to emerge through that journey. Mm. And so there's the internal experience that's happening of who am I, and what am I here to do here on planet Earth? How am I meant to serve? How am I meant to be a part of this community in a healthy way, a part of the human community in a really healthy way? And then there's culture saying, oh, this is what success looks like. This is what we should strive for. This is what we should do in order to be a success in life. But they don't necessarily, culture doesn't necessarily talk about the shadow side of that once we've got the mortgage and the job that makes us work 50 hours a week and the this and the that there's almost like these handcuffs that come around us. And it could also be a constriction in one's body as well, this constriction into, oh, wow, now I have all these responsibilities. Now I have this egoic construct that is attached to a certain way of being. And I also have children that I need to support, or a partner that I need to support, or a mortgage that I need to service, and a lifestyle I need to uphold. And suddenly we wake up to the fact that, wow, I'm actually quite trapped in this castle that I have created for myself. And also that culture has told me is the perfect castle. And to wake up to that can actually be an incredibly discombobulating and often quite grief-filled experience. Certainly for me, it was like, I'm supposed to have it all here. This is what I was supposed to do, is get to this point where I had all this seeming success, and I've got all of the things around me. I've got the family and the income and all of those things that are supposed to be what culture has told me and what's been imprinted into me is success. And yet there's still this experience that I'm having of internal aridity and disenfranchisement and misalignment. And so there's a journey there of certainly when I woke up to that experience, that there was quite a lot of grief and sadness and, wow, what do I do now? How do I dismantle this castle that I've created? And allow myself to go through that vulnerability, that experience of the castle being dismantled and me not knowing who I am if I don't have the fancy title, and I don't have the income, and I don't have all these things that the external world is giving me a real stamp of approval saying, you're doing really well. And I'm going, but I'm not. And now I have to pull all of that out and sort of sit here with myself in my own experience of what's happening and feel the vulnerability and the deep grief and sadness of the loss of that identity and the fear over not knowing who I really was or who I really am. Yeah. And having to sit in that void is a challenge. And, when we look at the Rites of Passage framework that is indigenous, many indigenous cultures around the world for generations and generations have been utilizing rites of passage ceremonies to support people to transition from one stage of life to the next, youth to transition into young adulthood, people to transition from mothers to transition from pregnancy into birth, ritual and ceremony around all of those transition moments, which are inevitable in every single one of our lives. And yet these core components that we are missing, or we lack the awareness to be able to embrace with with real acceptance, are missing from our cultures. So inevitably, as I started to look more deeply into what a rite of passage really was, because that's what I was going through, every rite of passage in its second phase of that transition has got the challenge. Adolescence is a challenge for a young adult. Transition out of university or out of school and into the big world as a young adult is a rite of passage. There's a challenge there. There's fear. Going overseas for the first time, having a baby, getting married. All of those involve some kind of experience that causes a sense of contraction because it's the unknown. It's the unknown that we are not necessarily taught in our culture, our modern day culture, how to be with grace and with awareness and with acceptance, to know that even through the dark ages, the Renaissance did follow, which was the time of the light and the bright and the art and the creativity and all of those extraordinary things that came with the Renaissance era. But there was the dark ages before, where everything was unknown and contracted and closed. And so to bring into this process of transition, the awareness and the understanding of what the challenge stage of a rite of passage is all about, supported me to be able to sit in that vulnerability and that fear of having dismantled who I was, to allow for myself to deeply trust in that space of vulnerability, to know that the next thing will emerge. But in this dark night, in this sort of in-between stage where one door is closed and the other has not yet opened and the passage is still really dark, that transformation is taking place. That there's so much that needs to melt off us, or needs to momentum within the way in which we were, or the way in which we thought we were, needs to kind of wane before it allows for the new to be birthed. Our culture is like, oh, you in one thing and just make sure you kind of, planned and prepped for the next thing, because you don't want to be out of that job and not into the next one because, you're too vulnerable, or, make sure you've trained, or you've done the next course, or you've done the next program, or you've added. It's constantly adding more to us, so that we never feel that vulnerability of the not knowing. And yet it's in that dissolution into the not knowing and allowing ourselves to be in that seemingly very vulnerable and fearful space that all of that momentum can wane, and we get the opportunity to listen more deeply to that internal voice that is telling us who we are, reminding us about who we are, and calling us forth into a purpose that is more aligned to who we are as a sovereign individual with our own unique gifts and talents, instead of saying, keep fitting into this box, keep fitting into this predetermined box that will keep you safe. This box will keep you safe if you keep following that. So for me, it was a really challenging time. And obviously there were implications as well, for my family. It was difficult for my husband to see me in a difficult place. And it was challenging for my friends to sort of be around me when, the external perspective or persona of Paula in that old life was she's got it all together. She knows exactly what she's doing. She has this whole life that she's got, and look at it. It all works from the outside. And now suddenly she's not clear and she's uncertain and she's fearful, and we don't really know how to be there for her in that space. So that sense of isolation did occur for me as well, which again is another facet of that challenge.
Mhm.
And it's in all of that sort of mirroring from the outside world in that challenge process that people didn't know how to be there for me, that I started to tap more deeply into the feminine consciousness journey, this feminine rite of passage, this self-sourcedness that I speak about that you mentioned in my bio, that it's like, wow, the outside world is not going to save me. There's no prince coming on a horse, contrary to all those fairy tales I was told when I was a little girl. There's no prince coming on a horse to save me.
Yeah.
And that there's nobody on the outside that can do this for me. This is a threshold I need to cross on my own. Sure, the community and my friends and my family and my beloveds can be near me in that process, but ultimately this is a journey with myself, on me really burrowing deep down into this deep intimacy, the intimacy with myself, for me to find that elixir of what is my unique gift and talent, what are my strengths, and how do I bring that forth into the world in a way that is clear and concise and is of service to others, based on the fact that it's coming from a deep place within me, which then is an embodied journey. And from an embodied place, as you said earlier in our discussion, that embodied place is where we are most likely to be able to be of service to others, because we can resonate with them in that place of understanding and knowing beyond the words, where people are able to connect to us in a way where they feel seen and they feel felt, because we are able to access to that deep feeling, knowing self within our own experience. And so that sort of is how that challenge process not only occurred for me, but also in turn became the greatest service to the journey for me. But that willingness to stay in that vulnerability was only made possible by bringing in that awareness and understanding of what a rite of passage is about. And with that awareness and understanding, although it didn't solve the problem, it built my capacity to be in that vulnerable in-between space in a way that was very... I could do it with a lot more grace, and with much less being flooded or being overwhelmed or being, destroyed by the vulnerability or the fear. It was like, I am vulnerable, I am fearful, I don't know what's next, and I am aware that this is a necessary thing. So I just need to stay the course, stay where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like you've had a just phenomenally wonderful and profound journey. And isn't it just amazing that when you knowingly and purposely put yourself into a challenging position and you stick with it, how it almost unfolds the life that you were meant to have.
Yeah.
Just by making the decision to because from listening to your story, you had what seemed like everything, right? The life that everyone told you, or everyone, society tells you that you should have, and you're seemingly successful, but something within you is just like, I don't feel it. Like there's something off here. And it was enough that to drive you. And when you looked at the opposite, it's like, okay, well, stay here unhappy, or do this, lose everything that I know, go into the unknown, don't know where I'm going to go, don't know what's going to happen. Okay, let's go. Right. And it's just like this very crazy notion that most people, they look at that like, man, you're insane for doing that. But look at what came out the other side. Look at what, when you went into the desert, look what came out. Right.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how there's a lot of people, there's a lot of circumstances and situations that from a lot of successful people where they have that moment where they have to decide, am I going to go with the flow of life, which is leading me down this unknown path? Or am I going to stay in the safe zone where everyone says I should be, but my heart's not here, right? This is not my purpose. This is not my passion. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And it's a difficult decision. right?
Yeah.
A very
Yeah.
challenging decision. And I'm always curious to want to dissect this. Like what do you think holds people back the
Mm.
most? Right?
Yeah.
That where it's where they'd rather stay in an unhappy position
Mm.
than go face the unknown and possibly find greatness on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah, look, you've touched on so many of the really critical aspects, I think, that are facing a lot of people who are experiencing that internal aridity, but not necessarily knowing how to address that. So, our pharmaceutical industry will just give us a whole lot of pills to take, and that will make you feel better,
Yeah.
instead of recognizing that there is another way. The system at the moment is not necessarily geared to support people to transition through this internal rite of passage, this feminine journey within oneself. Both of us have got this masculine and feminine side within us. You and I, to varying degrees. Obviously, you being a man and me being a woman, we've got varying degrees of it, but both of us have both of these elements of consciousness within us. And this internal rite of passage, this journey of the feminine consciousness to be able to go there, it's a lost and forgotten art. It's buried under the current culture. It's buried under the way in which our system has been geared, and that's been buried along with community as well. So, to pick out the key things that I think are standing in our way, the first is that we are plagued with fear. Unfortunately, the way our system is designed, we've got media that are telling us certain things. We've got media that are feeding us certain things. We've got structures that are not necessarily supportive of people having the spaciousness to be able to go into these parts of themselves. We've got a system that has kept us beholden now with mortgages and with families and this predetermined idea of what success looks like. We now have people all the way down that channel, and we've got people working 70 or 80-hour weeks while their children are being cared for by daycares. And, the family structures have broken down, and they feel like, oh, if I stop working, how am I going to support my children to get the best education? Or how am I going to get people through, the university or whatever it might be? We've got a system that's not geared to support us to make these transitions. So that's the one aspect. So the fear is one aspect. The system is the next aspect. And then the third one I'd say is community, is that our modern day way in which our communities are operating are not there in support. The communities are not there to support one another to make these transitions. So, certainly for me, I had a supportive community in as much as they were able to support me. But I had a lot of that, like, wow, like, why would you leave your job? Like, you're doing so well. Why would you go? Why would you take on that risk, that huge risk of losing that income when you have a family, and, all these, and to deal with that, as well as my own sort of resonance with knowing that I needed to transition into another stage, was an added layer of complexity and pressure that I had to be really discerning about how I navigated my way through that, and held other people's projections onto my journey at bay. So we've got to look at it in many different ways. How do we build communities in a way that the communities are functioning in a really healthy way, that we recognize when somebody is experiencing a call to their own transition, they're experiencing a need for a change within their lives, and how do then we as a community support them, not just in the actual I'm here for you, but how do we actually create structures and systems to support people to go through these processes themselves? And we do that here. I live in a beautiful place called Byron Bay in Australia, and I work very closely with a social enterprise here called the Rite of Passage Institute. And we support children and young adults, children transitioning into young adults with their parent, their mentor, be it a father or a mother, or their mentor that is looking after them, their guardian, to go through healthy rites of passage in that transition from adolescence into young adulthood in a really healthy way, where it's not just teaching the child or creating a rite of passage for that child to push against something in the cocoon of their lives and get the experience of being able to break through into that young adulthood, but it's also giving the adult the opportunity to learn how to be supportive of that young generation going through that transition. So you don't land up with dads saying to their 13-year-old daughters, oh, you'll always be my little girl. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm not your little girl anymore. I'm grown up now, and it's like, how do we help the adults really support the young children who are transitioning into that in a really healthy way, so the whole community is moving together with a growing awareness of how these transitions need to happen.
Yeah.
And so that community aspect, especially for us who are in our sort of, 35 to 50 or 60 years old, where we are trying to move from one stage of life into the next, when we've gone through the 20s and early 30s of expansion in that masculine process of seeking up and out and exploration and, acquiring different skills and trying on different jobs and doing different things all the way through to having acquired a toolbox of all of that experience to be able to arrive in the potency of our 40s and our early 50s, where we are really the sort of young generation of leaders who are looking to shepherd the world through the stage of very interesting times that we are all living through, but that we understand how to do that with clarity. And we don't necessarily have that structure within our communities and that structure within our system to support people to really understand how they can connect to that unique gift and talent that each and every one of us have, and then understand how to give that in service to the world and how to create in alignment with our own offerings that is attuned to the frequency that we're looking for, which is balance and harmony, good family structures.
I
Good
love
social
the concept of harmony.
Yeah, balance and harmony. There's not enough of that in the
Yeah.
world. I mean, we've
Yeah.
got COVID brought so many natural because it happened, but unnatural circumstances for families that revealed the imbalances within our structures.
Yeah.
But so much disharmony came out of that. People pitted against people with different ideals and different this and different that. There's like this polarizing experience where, harmony was not available, unfortunately. And now we're on this journey of recovery from this big rite of passage, which has been COVID, this big challenge, which has been COVID. Now, how do we integrate that really well? Well, we've got to start with ourselves. How do I transition through that really well? Do I have the community around me to support me with the awareness that I need to be able to transition through that well? And then for me to be able to connect to that part of myself where I know how to give myself in service back to the community, back out into the world, that is in balance first with myself. And if I'm in balance with myself, I am then in balance with all of that, my family structure, my community. And with that then comes this harmony, this possibility of harmony. But to get this big macro problem that we have in the world to solve, we have to work at it on a micro level within our own world and then within our own community, and to let that flower, above and beyond. And that's why we have a vision within our Rites of Passage communities, with all of us who work in the different ways across these different communities, is that we see that yoga became mainstream again and mindfulness became mainstream again. And right now we are in this process of rites of passage becoming mainstream again, where the awareness of this transition that is happening for all of us individually and what's being mirrored there in the collective with what's happened with COVID is that rites of passage to become mainstream again, we need to spread the awareness of how to do this process well, so that all of us can do that in a really healthy way, so that balance and harmony and the return of community can come back in a really beautiful and potent way. Yeah.
That is so well said.
Yeah.
You have a way of explaining this that's captivating.
Oh.
So this has been great. So I assume that you do a lot of coaching with individuals, that you help them through this. It seems to me that, I mean, with all the different reasons, and it's because there's I guess a main focal, like the actual core reason why they don't do it, and then there's the byproducts of all these things, like the community and the support and all this that is I guess like the byproduct of it, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, based on everything that you're saying, it sounds like the main reason that people don't do it is just based on the unknown. It's just it's like they just don't know, and they need certainty. They're looking for certainty, and you're not going to get it. Now, having a certain level of support makes you, it kind of gives you that courageous spark, so that you're more willing to go into the unknown when you have that, when you have those people rooting you on, right? Or having certain support structures that, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, I can go to these people in order to get more information, or to kind of lead and guide me while I'm in the dark. Like, they're going to give me a flashlight, right? But ultimately it comes down to, they just don't know.
Mm.
And when you don't know what you don't know, it's like it's super scary, and you'd rather just stay. It's like it's the devil you know versus the devil you
Mm.
don't, right? And they know that they're unhappy. They know they're into a situation that's not fulfilling them, that's not
Mhm.
their life's purpose, and they
Mhm.
feel at odds. They're out of alignment in their mind, their body, and their soul. But it's like, but I don't know. And so I find it so fascinating why some people are willing to go into the unknown, and
Mm.
what is it that drove them, like you, right? Like
Mm.
you
Yeah.
had it within you, right? And there was everyone was like, "Oh, you're crazy. What are you doing?" Like, but you're like, "Nope." Like you had so much belief and faith within
Mm.
yourself that you knew that this is it was this the question that drove you. Like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? And no matter what, you were going to go down that path. But then there's some people that they would rather stay in the safety zone without
Mhm.
going into the unknown,
Mhm.
even though they're unhappy. And like, what's the difference between those two, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the
Maybe,
head there. So
and maybe
where
we'll never find it. I don't know.
Really, or like where do we get stuck? What
Yeah.
what is that stuckness about, getting to that point where we feel that disenfranchisement, and at the same time we recognize that there is this call to something more from our lives, but something holds us back. And yes, we've spoken about all these sort of extrinsic factors that have programmed us into a certain way of being, and that have kept us beholden perhaps to a system or a mortgage or a structure, and all of that's a aspect. When we bring it down to the personal, is
Yeah.
that the work that we do, and I'm not sure if you have done much work on sort of the inner child work, or what we call in the journey of feminine consciousness, where there are these archetypes of the female or the feminine form, the maiden, the mother, and the crone.
Mhm.
Is that we look at these younger versions of ourselves, or when we were younger in our lives, when we didn't necessarily have the toolkit, the maturity, the awareness. School didn't necessarily teach us certain emotional intelligence techniques to be able to navigate some really big and difficult experiences that were happening for us, especially in those very impressionable years. These two stages where we have our core belief patterns laid down, one between 0 and 3 when we are born, and we have this big hormone surge as we're coming into the world, and then again from 10 to 14 when we go through that adolescent phase, another big hormone surge. There's so much that's happening, and then for women it again happens in menopause. But those younger years for both men and women have this very malleable, very what you call liminal space within our bodies, within our psyches, for certain imprints to get laid down and get imprinted within us. And what happens then is that our ego becomes very protective. With best meaning intentions, there is this part of us that comes out and goes, oh my gosh, overwhelmed, can't cope, don't know how to deal with this, that situation, that experience. And this might be something that's a trauma with a capital T that unfortunately would have happened to many people in our world. And then there's also the traumas with the little t's, that it's like, well, that didn't seem like such a big deal. And yet, I've certainly mined in my life for all of these either big T's or little t's, and go, wow, geez, just the way in which that headmistress spoke to me in that one time, did that really leave such an impression that has held me back and kept me a little bit uncertain my whole life? Well, actually, yes, it did, because when I went into journey work and processing to be able to digest the things that were keeping me stuck, there were many little things, seemingly little traumas, that I just disregarded. But I disregarded because my ego at the time was so overwhelmed with the experience that was happening from this authority figure that was coming down at me about something that I didn't actually do when I was in year 7, that I didn't know how to deal with it. Even when I tried to defend myself, she said, I don't believe you. And just those little things in that moment, what a lasting impact that had on my life, for me to keep me stuck in my maturity now as a woman. Suddenly I'm still not able to take certain steps or do certain things because there's this uncertain voice in me that happened to me when I was in year 7. And so going back into that experience through journey work, and what I do with the women in the circles that I run, and what I do in the coaching process, is we journey into these parts of ourselves that got stuck somewhere along the line, through what might seemingly seem like, and our ego today will be very clever by going, oh, but it'll disregard it because it's still trying to protect that part of us. at the time, it didn't know how to deal with it. So it kind of put a big barrier on, saying, don't ever want that to come out again. Let's just keep that protected over there, and let's carry on living and growing through our lives to, now I'm 41 years old. So it's like, now I'm 41 years old. But then something will come up that I'll be like uncertain about. Oh, there's this little part of me that got uncertain back then, that my ego is trying to protect me. So it's keeping me held back now, because it thinks it's going to experience that same sense of overwhelm it did back then, because back then it didn't know how to cope. And how do I then cultivate my ability as the mature woman that I am now, flex this muscle as woman, as the mother frequency that I am now, to go into this part of myself I mentioned earlier, this internal experience, down to this little part of me that was at some stage in my life hurt and overwhelmed and didn't know how to deal with it. And that part got shut down. And I can go in, and I, as the mother, can tend to this part. There's no prince coming to tend to that part. There's no knight in shining armor to come and tend to that part. So what I work with women is cultivating their capacity and their awareness to be able to recognize the mature feminine that lives within themselves, the sovereign woman that lives within themselves, the maturity that we have as a 40-something, 50-something, 30-something-year-old woman, to be able to recognize that there's just this beautiful younger version part of ourselves that needs nurturing and love and attention, and needs to be given the assurance that it's okay, we've got this now. I'm 41 now. We've got this now. Don't worry. You can come here. I can give you the nurturing that you needed at the time. I know that experience was overwhelming for you back then, but I know how to give you the safety and the security that you felt was lacking at that point in your life. I can give that to you now. And I can bring this fragmented part of me into wholeness to sit on my lap with a lot more care and love. And then in this moment now, where I was feeling stuck, I'm no longer feeling stuck anymore, because that part of my life is no longer running who I am now at 41. That part of my life has been brought into wholeness. I am giving it what it needs. I am more integrated into who I am now, and I am now able to take action and step over these thresholds that previously I wasn't able to step over, because this part of me was afraid, and that's okay. How can I help that part of me become less afraid by giving it what it needs, bringing it into wholeness, and then being here as the 41-year-old woman that I am, not as the year 7 girl who didn't know how she was going to cope. And so finding these, going through processes where, we sit in circles and we tell our stories, and a lot of this comes up where we have the opportunity to challenge the narratives that we have through the prompts in the circles that we sit in, where it's a lot of reflective listening, a lot of giving each woman the opportunity to just speak freely for 5-10 minutes about their experience, to give them the opportunity to actually hear themselves speak without somebody else needing to make them feel better or rescue them or tell them that they shouldn't feel that way. So often we are jumping to solve other people's problems because we are not comfortable with their discomfort. But the more we give one another, we hold integral space with deep levels of listening and deep levels of holding a sacred space where women know that it's confidential and that it's sacred and that they are in circle with other women that they can trust. Their systems start to relax, and that gives them the opportunity to speak more clearly for themselves, to hear themselves speak while they're being witnessed by others in presence and love, to challenge the narrative that they formed, which is probably from a wounding way back when, that they can then be like, wow, is that really what's going on for me here? Or I'm hearing that's going on for me. That's surprising. Wow. How then do I then on a one-to-one level help them access that part of themselves, help them build the toolkit to be able to give that part of themselves that is keeping them stuck an opportunity to be heard and seen and felt, brought into the pure light of this moment now, integrated into the woman that they are now, to be able to take a deep breath and not necessarily have those ropes in the water that are keeping us stuck. It's about becoming unstuck. How do we become unstuck? And how do we do it for ourselves with the support of me or a coach, or this the potency of sitting in circle. How do we become unstuck? All of these little layers. Ultimately, I'm not there to solve anything for anybody. I'm there to hold a mirror, like mirrors have been held for me to gain the toolkit I need to give me the opportunity to access this for myself. Because once we've got it for ourselves, as you well know, Greg, it's once we've got it for ourselves, it is ours. It can never be taken away. Nobody can shift that or change that, and we can live from that place in a really potent way, as opposed to needing to lean on others' wisdom or others' ideas, or bypassing ourselves and hoping that there's somebody else who's more intelligent or more clever that we can put in front of somebody, say, here's the answer. No, the answer is from within, this pure, deep light of presence within each of us that we get to discover for ourselves in that opportunity, with all these different ways in which we can kind of tinker somebody towards that discovery for themselves. Yeah.
That sounds so transformational and powerful. I love it. I love every single bit of it. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening right now that are intrigued to even learn more, to find out more. If there's anyone that wanted to learn more and follow you, what's the best place to follow you?
Yeah, beautiful. So I have a website called www.thefrequency.global, and my Instagram is thefrequency.global. And you can follow me on either of those. Those are probably the best two channels. And there's, a possibility of booking discovery calls as well, if women just want to talk about where they're at in their lives or what might be happening for them. There's, lots of different links within the website, either to my email address or through to booking a discovery call, where we can talk and digest a little bit more about what's going on for them, to see where they are in this moment now, and how best to support them from this moment now into what feels like an ever unfolding experience of discovering more of one's own self.
Yeah.
And that's, it's not like, oh, cool, come on this 2-day program and you'll be enlightened, or come on this 3-day weekend and, you'll be completely, set in a new place. You may very well have extraordinary discoveries, but, as you'll probably well know from your own journey, Greg, that we continue to discover more and more of who we already are. And isn't this the magic and the journey of life, is this continuous discovery of more of who we actually are? And that's where the journey, the winding journey, which is this feminine cycle of, infinity and around that happens for all of us, of discovering more of who we already are and how to live from that place each time with a heightened degree of compassion and love and presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much Paula for coming on and just sharing your experience and all of your wisdom. And the last question I ask all my guests is, you have the opportunity to learn from, speak with, spend intimate time with, break bread with 3 people, anyone in history, living or deceased. Who would those people be and why?
Absolutely. Number 1 is Nelson Mandela.
That's a good one. He's a great leader. Great leader.
And I had the absolute privilege of meeting him twice. So while I was growing up in South Africa, that's where I'm from, I met him twice. And I had a really extraordinary opportunity to spend some time with Nelson Mandela. And, the gravitas and the presence of that man was really quite extraordinary, next level. I would love to also meet Mother Teresa, to have that woman that was so rooted in the deeply compassionate part of her heart, regardless of, her earthly wares or her earthly acquisition. She had none of those. She was just so rooted in her loving presence and in her heart. I would very much love to have met Mother Teresa. And let me think about somebody in today's world that I would be really inspired to meet. Somebody living at this moment in time. I'd like to go with somebody along the lines of, there's probably some people that are living, if I was able to communicate with them, people who are living, for example, deep in the sort of Amazon jungle, deep indigenous people who are very attuned to the way in which the earth frequency operates. I feel very called to really tap into that indigenous wisdom, that those people who are outside of this matrix that we all live in the Western world, in the modern day world, those people who have lived their whole life outside of technology, outside of cars and machinery and that sort of thing, to really be in the frequency of those people or somebody within those tribes, And obviously we don't have any names because those people are rather well hidden and well preserved, but I would, the Amazon jungle, or somebody from deep within the African, Sahara Desert, that is attuned to the frequency of the Mother Earth in a profound way, that I'd be able to learn from an indigenous elder in that way. So yeah, that at this moment in time.
That's really good. I love that. I love that answer. Well, Paula, thank you so much for coming on the Be the Difference podcast. I truly appreciate it. For those of you that are watching, this was such a powerful episode. This is one of my favorite that I've recorded in a long time. I want you to go back and re-listen to this, and I need you to do me a favor. I want you to share this with somebody else, because this is so profound that I know it's going to touch a lot of lives. It takes only 30 seconds to share this with somebody. Share a link, put it on your social media, give us a quick rating or review, just to talk about how this actually changed your perspective, or what impact it had in your life. It means the world to both Paula and I that you do that. This has been the Be the Difference podcast. I'm your host, Greg Birch. Until next time, we'll see.